Harlem Nights. Eddie Murphy's directorial debut in 1989 scored only 27% with critics, but earned 80% audience approval. Harlem Nights was released November 17, 1989, starring Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, and Red Fox. Set in 1938 Harlem, the film follows nightclub owners battling gangsters and corrupt police during the Prohibition era. Critics called it an extended Saturday Night Live sketch lacking punch and criticized Murphy's direction heavily. The film received a Rotten Tomatoes score of 27% from critics versus 80% from audiences, creating a 53 percentage point gap. Working with a budget of $30 million, the film earned $60.9 million at the domestic box office. Murphy wrote, directed, and starred in this Prohibition-era crime comedy, bringing together an iconic comedic cast including Arsenio Hall, Della Reese, and Danny Aiello. This remains the only film Murphy has ever directed due to the critical reception. This represents one of the earliest major examples of a star-driven vehicle where studio power met audience enthusiasm despite critical dismissal. The film's success, despite panning, demonstrates how established comedic stars could override critical opinion through sheer fan loyalty. Event Horizon. Paul W.S. Anderson's 1997 sci-fi horror film scored 31 to 36% on Rotten Tomatoes, but earned 61 to 74% audience approval and became a cult classic. Event Horizon was released August 15, 1997, starring Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill. The film follows a rescue crew investigating a missing spaceship that reappears after traveling to another dimension. Working with a budget of $60 million, it earned approximately $42 to $47 million worldwide, making it a box office failure. Critics called it derivative, combining elements of Alien and The Shining without originality or coherence. The film received particularly harsh criticism for its graphic violence and disturbing imagery, which many reviewers found gratuitous. Rotten Tomatoes shows 31 to 36% from critics versus 61 to 74% from audiences, a significant gap. The original cut was reportedly much longer and more disturbing, but the footage has been lost or destroyed. The studio essentially dumped the film with minimal promotion after poor test screenings. Over the following decades, horror and sci-fi fans rediscovered Event Horizon through home video, recognizing its genuinely terrifying atmosphere and commitment to cosmic horror themes. The film's exploration of hell dimensions and psychological torture influenced numerous later horror films. Its practical effects and production design became celebrated as superior to many modern CGI-heavy films. The film now appears regularly on best sci-fi horror lists, despite its critical and commercial failure. This demonstrates how horror films pushing boundaries often face initial rejection before finding devoted audiences who appreciate exactly what critics hated. Tommy Boy. The 1995 Chris Farley comedy holds 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, but achieved 90% audience score. Tommy Boy was released March 31, 1995, starring Chris Farley and David Spade. Roger Ebert gave it 1 out of 4 stars, calling it a haphazard collection of gags. The film opened at number 1 with $8 million and finished with a total domestic gross of $32.7 million. Working with a budget of $20 million, it became a cult classic through home video. The film earned a cinema score of A-, indicating strong word of mouth among opening weekend audiences. Rotten Tomatoes shows 39% from critics versus 90% from audiences, a 51 percentage point gap. Farley and Spade's Saturday Night Live chemistry drove audience appeal despite the thin plot. This buddy comedy became a quintessential example of critic-proof humor, where physical comedy and established duo chemistry trumped narrative sophistication. Its home video success rewrote the profitability model for mid-tier comedies. Boondock Saints. The 1999 Vigilante film has one of the largest critic-audience divides in cinema history, with a 27% critic score versus 91% audience approval. The Boondock Saints had its festival premiere August 4, 1999, with wide release in January 2000. Written and directed by Troy Duffy, the film stars Sean Patrick Flannery and Norman Reedus as Irish Catholic twin brothers who become vigilantes. Critics called it a Tarantino ripoff, with no skill and uneven, shoddy production values. The original theatrical run grossed only $45,000 domestically due to extremely limited release. The budget was approximately $6 million, financed through independent funding. Rotten Tomatoes shows 27% from critics versus 91% from audiences, a 64 percentage point gap. The film became a massive DVD success, selling over $50 million worth of home video copies. Its cult following grew through word of mouth in the early 2000s. Willem Dafoe's performance as FBI agent Paul Smecker received particular audience praise. A sequel was released in 2009, with similarly poor critical reception, but stronger box office performance. This represents the ultimate cult film success story, where critical dismissal and theatrical failure transformed into massive home video popularity. The extreme violence mixed with religious themes created a polarizing experience that found its audience through peer recommendation rather than critical guidance. Swordfish. The 2001 cyber thriller scored 26% on Rotten Tomatoes, but earned $147 million worldwide on a $102 million budget. Swordfish was released June 8, 2001, starring John Travolta, Hugh Jackman, and Halle Berry. Directed by Dominic Sena with a budget of $102 million, the film faced harsh critical consensus, describing it as big on explosions, but skimping on plot and logic. Rotten Tomatoes shows 26% from critics versus 59% from audiences, a 33 percentage point gap. The opening weekend brought in $18.1 million, with total domestic earnings of $69.8 million. International gross reached $77.3 million for a worldwide total of $147 million. The film became famous for Halle Berry's topless scene, for which she was reportedly paid $500,000 extra. Some critics compared Travolta's performance to his role in Pulp Fiction. The film features an iconic opening monologue criticizing Hollywood's lack of realism. This cyber thriller exemplified early 2000s action cinema, where star power and set pieces overcame narrative coherence. The film's self-aware meta-commentary about Hollywood actually alienated critics, while audiences embraced the escapist fantasy. National Treasure. Nicolas Cage's 2004 adventure earned 46% from critics, but 76% audience approval, and $347.5 million worldwide. National Treasure was released November 19, 2004, directed by John Turteltaub. The film stars Nicolas Cage, Diane Kruger, and Sean Bean in a story involving stealing the Declaration of Independence to find Revolutionary War treasure. Opening weekend audiences gave it an A- cinema score. Working with a production budget of $100 million, it earned $173 million domestically. International box office brought the total to $347.5 million. Rotten Tomatoes shows 46% from critics versus 76% from audiences, a 30 percentage point gap. Critics called it a tepid Indiana Jones knockoff with flaccid execution. The film spawned a 2007 sequel, Book of Secrets, which showed a similar critic-audience divide. This family adventure proved that historical conspiracy theories and patriotic treasure hunts could create massive audience appeal despite critical eye-rolling. It launched a franchise that consistently delivered what audiences wanted, which was competent heroes solving puzzles in exotic locations. By the way, if you're enjoying this type of content, I create videos like this constantly. I'd really appreciate if you subscribed. Man on Fire. Denzel Washington's 2004 revenge thriller scored 38% with critics, but 89% audience approval. Man on Fire was released April 21, 2004, directed by Tony Scott. The film stars Denzel Washington, Dakota Fanning, Christopher Walken, and Mickey Rourke in a story set in Mexico City. It's based on the 1980 novel by A.J. Quinnell. Rotten Tomatoes shows 38% from critics versus 89% from audiences, a 51 percentage point gap. The budget of $70 million led to a domestic gross of $77.9 million and a worldwide total of $130 million. Critics criticized the bloated runtime and excessive, unnecessarily brutal violence. Audiences praised Washington's brooding charisma and the father-daughter dynamic at the film's core. The film features a distinctive editing style with subtitles and visual effects that divided viewers. This became Washington's highest audience score among his 5 collaborations with Tony Scott. This revenge thriller demonstrated how star charisma and emotional core could transcend critical concerns about violence and style. The extreme critical audience split highlighted the gap between critical distaste for vigilantism and audience desire for cathartic justice narratives. Butterfly Effect. The 2004 sci-fi thriller earned 34% on Rotten Tomatoes, but 81% audience approval and $96 million worldwide. The Butterfly Effect was released January 23, 2004, starring Ashton Kutcher and Amy Smart. Directors Eric Bress and J. Mackay Gruber worked with a budget of $13 million. The opening weekend brought in $17 million, with domestic total reaching $57.9 million. Worldwide gross hit $96.1 million against the $13 million budget. Rotten Tomatoes Tomatoes shows 34% from critics versus 81% from audiences, a 47 percentage point gap. The critics' consensus described it as an intriguing premise placed in service of an overwrought, tasteless thriller. Opening weekend audiences gave it a B+ cinema score. The film features 4 alternate endings, with the director's cut being significantly darker than the theatrical version. The plot involves time travel through reading childhood journals to change past events. This time travel thriller became a DVD phenomenon, where audiences embraced its dark themes and multiple endings, while critics dismissed it as pretentious. The film's exploration of trauma and consequences resonated with younger viewers who found substance critics missed. Transformers: Age of Extinction. The 2014 Transformers sequel has an 18% Rotten Tomatoes score, but became the highest-grossing film of 2014 worldwide, with $1.105 billion worldwide. Transformers: Age of Extinction was released June 27, 2014, directed by Michael Bay. Mark Wahlberg stars as the lead human protagonist, replacing Shia LaBeouf from previous films. This 4th film in the Transformers franchise has a running time of 2 hours, 45 minutes. The budget of $210 million led to a domestic gross of $245.4 million. International gross reached $859.8 million for a worldwide total of $1.105 billion. Rotten Tomatoes shows 18% from critics versus 57% from audiences, a 39 percentage point gap. Only film of 2014 to cross $1 billion worldwide. Introduced Dinobots in final third of film. Despite critical panning, became 5th highest grossing film of 2014 domestically. It had strong October preview screenings with $10 million Thursday night. This represents the pinnacle of critic-proof franchise filmmaking, where international audiences, particularly in China, completely ignored domestic critical consensus. The film proved that spectacle and brand recognition could overwhelm narrative concerns on a global scale. Knowing. Nicolas Cage's 2009 apocalyptic thriller scored 33% on Rotten Tomatoes, but earned $79.9 million domestic on a $50 million budget. Knowing was released March 20th, 2009, directed by Alex Proyas. The film stars Nicolas Cage, Rose Byrne, and Chandler Canterbury in a plot involving time capsule predictions of global disasters. Rotten Tomatoes shows 33% from critics versus 66% from audiences, a 33 percentage point gap. Working with a budget of $50 million, it earned $79.9 million domestically and $183.6 million worldwide. Roger Ebert gave it 4 out of 4 stars, calling it a splendid thriller, despite the critical consensus against it. The film features impressive plane crash and subway disaster sequences created with practical effects. The ending involves alien intervention and Earth's destruction, which proved controversial. Metacritic shows 41 out of 100 from critics versus 6.8 out of 10 from users. This sci-fi thriller demonstrated how a film could be simultaneously celebrated by major critics like Ebert and savaged by the majority, creating a unique split where audiences sided with the minority critical view. Its philosophical themes about determinism divided viewers along intellectual rather than entertainment lines. Super Mario Bros. Movie. The 2023 animated film has 54% critic score versus 96% audience approval, representing one of the largest modern divides. The Super Mario Bros. Movie was released April 5, 2023, by Illumination Entertainment and Nintendo. The film stars Chris Pratt, Anya Taylor-Joy, Charlie Day, and Jack Black in voice roles. It earned $1.36 billion worldwide on a $100 million budget. Rotten Tomatoes shows 54% from critics versus 96% from audiences, a 42 percentage point gap. The critics' consensus described it as a colorful, albeit thinly plotted animated adventure. The film became the highest-grossing video game movie of all time. The opening weekend brought in $146.4 million domestically. Critics complained about lack of depth, while audiences praised the faithful adaptation of the beloved video game property. This represents the modern paradigm of critic-audience divide, where critics evaluate it as film, while audiences evaluate it as faithful adaptation of beloved property. The massive success proved critics fundamentally misunderstood the assignment, which was to deliver Mario, not a Pixar-level narrative. Venom. The 2018 Sony Marvel film has a 30% Rotten Tomatoes score, but 80% audience approval, and earned $856 million worldwide. Venom was released October 5, 2018, starring Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock and Venom. Directed by Ruben Fleischer, with a budget of $100 million, it earned $213.5 million domestically and $642.6 million internationally. Rotten Tomatoes shows 30% from critics versus 80% from audiences, a 50 percentage point gap. Opening night previews brought in $10 million, showing strong audience interest. The critics' consensus described it as chaotic, noisy, and in desperate need of stronger attachment to Spider-Man. Audience praise focused on Hardy's performance and Venom's personality, which differed dramatically from what critics wanted. Hardy reportedly improvised many scenes, including the famous lobster tank moment that became a fan favorite. The film was expected to fail after Spider-Man 3's poor reception of Venom years earlier. It spawned a trilogy with similar critic-audience divides. Let There Be Carnage scored 58% critics versus 84% audience, and The Last Dance scored 41% critics versus 80% audience. This anti-hero film proved that audiences craved different superhero content than critics wanted, prioritizing character charisma over narrative coherence. The success birthed an entire critic-proof franchise that consistently ignored reviews while delivering crowd-pleasing entertainment. Godzilla King of Monsters. The 2019 Monster sequel earned 42% from critics, but 83% audience approval. Godzilla King of the Monsters was released May 31, 2019 as part of the MonsterVerse franchise. The film stars Millie Bobby Brown, Kyle Chandler, and Vera Farmiga. Rotten Tomatoes shows 42% from critics versus 83% from audiences, a 41 percentage point gap. The budget of $170 to $200 million led to a worldwide gross of $386.6 million. The film underperformed financially despite audience enthusiasm. Critics found the human characters boring, while audiences loved the monster battles featuring King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan alongside Godzilla. This monster movie shows the purest form of the divide where critics evaluate human drama while audiences evaluate giant monster fights. The financial underperformance suggests the divide alone doesn't guarantee success. Last Jedi inverse. For perspective, Star Wars: The Last Jedi shows the opposite divide, with 91% critics versus 45% audience. The film was released December 15, 2017, directed by Rian Johnson. Rotten Tomatoes shows 91% from critics versus 45% from audiences, a 46 percentage point gap in the reverse direction. It grossed $1.333 billion worldwide, proving the divide didn't affect financial success in this case. Critics praised the subversion of franchise tropes, while audiences rejected the character arcs and plot choices. This demonstrates that divides can go both directions depending on the content. Franchise fatigue and divided fandom contributed to the audience rejection despite critical acclaim. This inverse example proves that critic-audience divides aren't always about dumb fun versus sophistication. Sometimes critics embrace artistic risk while audiences reject change to beloved franchises. It complicates the critics are snobs narrative by showing evaluation differences work in multiple directions. Grown-ups. Adam Sandler's comedies consistently show divides, with Grown Ups scoring 10% critics but 63% audience. Grown Ups was released June 25, 2010, starring Sandler, Chris Rock, and Kevin James. Rotten Tomatoes shows 10% from critics versus 63% from audiences, a 53 percentage point gap. The budget of $80 million led to worldwide gross of $271.4 million. The sequel, Grown Ups 2, scored 7% from critics versus 53% from audiences. Sandler's Happy Madison productions consistently show 40 to 50 point gaps between critics and audiences. Critics cite immature jokes and no discernible plot as major issues. Audiences praise consistent laughs and cast chemistry as reasons for enjoyment. This represents a broader Sandler divide across his entire filmography. Adam Sandler embodies the modern critic-audience divide, where his specific brand of humor and loyal fanbase completely bypass critical opinion. His films prove that established comedic personas can maintain decades-long careers despite consistent critical panning. If you found this interesting, think about subscribing so you don't miss future uploads. Thanks for watching.